calling the committee of conference to order on HB 315. And with that, we are going to take a short break and see if Senator Abbas joins us in the next 5 minutes. At this point, I'm reopening the committee conference on House Bill 315. And the first thing I'm going to do to start is I'm going to ask the Senate conferees if you could tell us what was the impetus for changing the bill from what the House passed, which we passed on a unanimous voice vote.
Thank you. When you included all these other protected classes and I think race, religion, there's a whole, and then some political points as well, there was the concern of potential unintended consequences of expanding it that broad. So we had concern about doing that, and if we were going to ever, increase the scope, we would really want to cover each topic individually, have a hearing on that to make sure we didn't take it in a direction we weren't intending on going in. So we thought it would make more sense to amend it back to the original bill, which really had a narrow application of when it would apply. And I know that was a bill that we had last term, so I was familiar with it, and I knew that passed in the House last term, and I was confident we can get it done. So that was the reason why we did that. That was not meant as any disrespect to any of the other classes that were listed.
No, and I would never assume that it was. We were concerned because we did pass it out of our committee unanimously, and it passed on a voice vote on the floor. Could you give me an example of what maybe an unintended consequence might be if we were to leave it? Anyone? Just.
Sure. Well, and just to clarify, when it comes to the other classes, I have not heard, or we didn't receive any testimony of anyone raising those as a potential defense or a mitigation defense. We're saying, oh, race or religion was involved, and that's why they should get a lesser offense. We didn't hear about that anywhere in the country, never mind here in New Hampshire. So that was one of the other reasons. But let's just say religion, right? People have an argument about religion. It can be debated. They get in an altercation. That's what happens. We didn't really feel that was something that we really wanted to cover because, one, we're not clear that would be even an appropriate time to raise a mitigation defense, but we just felt that was not really what we were debating.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, thank you, Senator.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'm going to sort of argue in the alternative because I actually voted for the full version that the House sent over. But I know that there were concerns raised by the defense bar and not specifically about the other, things that the House put in rightly, but just the important balance between the constitutional issues with having someone being able to mount a defense and balancing it with the very important issues that were raised. And so I think that was the concern, that maybe we needed more time to strike that right balance rather than we never want to add those additional categories.
Okay, and I think having already spoken with our conferees that we can understand that. Having said that, we did have some concerns about the bill as it was sent over from the Senate. And I'm going to ask if that you will indulge me, Representative Lynn, to address the conferees on what the concern was and what our proposed changes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Bob Lynn. I'm a rep from Wyndham. And first, I want to say at the outset, as I said to the House last week, I raised this issue because I was concerned about unintended consequences. On the question of the basic purpose of the legislation, I'm a very strong supporter of it. But if you go to the Senate version of the bill that was passed and what was before the House for the question of whether we would concur or not, here was my concern. In the new proposed paragraph 4A, what I believe would happen if this were presented to a court to construe it, the way the court would read the language is if you go down to line 8, and I'm starting to, where it says, provocation was not objectively reasonable. I think what would happen is the court would read it as if there was a colon there, was not objectively reasonable, colon, 1, if, and then that would go, if it resulted from the discovery of, knowledge about, or potential disclosure of the victim's actual or perceived gender, gender identity, gender expression, sex, or sexual orientation, including under circumstances in which the victim made an unwanted, non-forcible romantic or sexual advance towards the defendant, comma. And then the court would say, or, and would put in a to, if the defendant and victim dated or had a romantic or sexual relationship. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. For example, first, I know there was some suggestion, well, maybe that last clause was really meant to be, sort of modified by the earlier clause. But the problem is you've got two, and this may sound kind of silly, but it's the way statutory construction works. You've got two ifs. So the court would say what they really meant was one, if one, or if two. And the problem with if you read the language that would say provocation was not objectively reasonable if the defendant and victim dated or had a romantic or sexual relationship, and you take out all of that stuff before, that in clause one, what that could be read to mean would be what the sort of law school case book example of when provocation can legitimately be raised. That is, you come home, you think you're happily married, you come home early from work one day and you find your wife or husband, whatever the case may be, in bed with somebody else, and you're outraged and you immediately shoot your wife or husband and the third party. That's sort of a typical situation where the law has allowed a defendant to raise the issue of extreme provocation. And two would seem to say you can't do that anymore. And I didn't, I don't think that was the intent to want to do that. And so that was my concern.
If I may, Mr. Chair? Right. So thank you for raising that. My understanding, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, is that what that section was intended to address is that if a transgender individual had not disclosed prior their gender identity, that if it was later disclosed, that couldn't be used. So I think that's what that was intended to address. But I think that could be addressed in other ways to avoid the issues that you're raising.
No, exactly. I mean, I'm sure that was what was intended. It's just that the way you'd have to recast the language somehow to change it. So. I would love to be able to say this was my idea, and but I didn't. There were two suggested changes. Representative Kutab had suggested a change, which would simply be to take out that last clause and end the sentence in paragraph 4, end it with the word defendant on line 11. So just remove that paragraph, that last clause. Oh, I'm sorry, and also take out the word unwanted, so that it would simply be non-forcible. That is a way to do it, which would avoid the issue that I just discussed. But I think that a better suggestion is what is proposed in Amendment 2023, which I had prepared and I've offered for the committee's consideration. And it's based on some information provided to us by a law professor from Georgia, who apparently has really spent a lot of time focusing on this area. He's worked with legislatures in other states, I think maybe Illinois and Michigan and some other states. He's a proponent of it. Yes, he's a proponent of what's referred to as eliminating the sort of gay panic defense, and so that is what is contained in this amendment. I think the language, as he pointed out, the language was drafted very carefully with a lot of input from various stakeholders, and it was designed to make sure that it didn't, that it didn't go too far. That, in other words, that it basically said if something would not constitute a basis for constituting extreme provocation under the law, it doesn't become so on the basis that, you know, the actor's knowledge of or discovery of the sexual identification, gender identification, sexual orientation of the victim. The thing I thought that language is very good, and the other thing that I really thought was an improvement in this over any of the versions, both the House or the Senate version, is that this version makes it apply not just to the circumstance of where you're trying to reduce murder to manslaughter. That's the extreme provocation part. But it would also apply in the circumstances of self-defense. In other words, your person cannot, this would say, if you're not otherwise justified in acting in self-defense, you can't say, well, but the person that I acted against was transgender or you know, gay or whatever, and that made it all right. This would say you can't do that, and it seems to me that's, you know, that to me that's a no-brainer. You should not be able to. You should not be able to use that as a basis to say, you know, violence was justified. That's my view.
We have a couple of questions. I'm just going to ask one first. So this language has been used in other states.
Yes, it's, you know, I mean, I worded it to conform with our statute, but the substance of the language, you know, has been used in other states. I should say, according to what the professor said in his email to us. I didn't go look up Illinois law or Michigan law, but that I'm assuming he was telling us the truth. I have no reason to believe he wasn't.
Okay, thank you. Senator Whitley, you got
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I think this language does get us closer. The only thing that I want this committee to consider is the situation actually where a lot of this legislation has arisen. It was with the death and murder of Matthew Shepard. And in that situation, there was unwanted sexual advances, and that was part of the situation. So I think the only thing that this language doesn't have is that scenario. So I'm wondering if the committee wants to consider, you know, sort of adding a clause similar to line 10 and 11 as amended by the Senate, including under circumstances in which the victim made an unwanted, and I think there was conversation about should it be unwanted or non-forcible. I think just unwanted romantic or sexual advance toward the defendant. We could add that clause at the very end of this language presented by Representative Lynn, and that would address the so-called Matthew Shepard situation.
The only thing I have concerns with and I want to avoid is the unintended consequence of it applying also to a woman who a man is making unwanted sexual advances towards, and she feels threatened, her bodily safety, and she reacts. Is she now barred because we put this in here?
Yes, I think that's to respond, if I may, I think that's a very valid concern. And so we would have to tie it to this very situation that we're talking about here related to someone's sexual orientation, gender identification, or gender expression, because I think that's a very valid concern. So we would have to tie it together, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What the senator and actually what you just brought up is what I'm sitting here going into a little bit of convulsions over is, and all joking aside, a person's perception is their own reality. And I do not see myself in favor of anything that is saying non-forcible romantic or sexual advances toward the defendant. That can turn on a dime to be aggressive. That wording cannot be in here. You cannot tell somebody that something was non-forcible because the person that started to be non-forcible ended up becoming non-forcible. You can't do that. You can't tell a person that it wasn't non-forcible. Unwanted touching is unwanted touching, period.
But I believe if we are very specific and narrow in the language, we might be able to craft it such that that does not become the issue. Is this your proposed ad?
It is.
Would you
Representative,
take a
I
look at that?
fully agree with you. It's a non-starter for me as well, and that's why I fully agree with you, and that's why it's very important to tie that piece just to the so-called gay panic defense. And Representative Lynn, did you have a?
You know, I looked at your proposed language. I think that, the way you worded it, that's fine. I don't think that's a problem.
Did the other House conferees, would you, any comments or thoughts? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just, okay. All right, so go ahead. Yes,
Well, I just
Representative Wheeler.
want to say that I think at this moment it's important that we do subscribe to the House version. I thought we came up with a really good proposal, which included religion, race, creed, sexual orientation. And I think that's a solid way to go about it. And those are the right classes that we should be protecting. And it seems to me that the Senate had added a little bit too much. And given that we had passed it with a voice vote, unanimous vote in the committee, and on consent, that we should move forward with the House position on.
Thank you. I would also like to, if he's here, as a sponsor, I would like, if you would, what are your thoughts on the amendment that we have before us with the language that Senator Whitley just added? If you have it, or maybe you don't have it yet.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is Representative Sean Filio. I represent Ward 2 in Keene. The amendment that has been proposed by Representative Lynn goes a long ways towards addressing the concerns that were raised in the House during the concurrence, as well as raised with regards to the issues of self-defense and provocation. I think that we need to be careful not to lose the forest for the trees. Ultimately, what this bill is trying to do is protect LGBTQ individuals from violence. And this proposed change does that. While we can address issues related to unwanted sexual advances, that language can be dealt with at a later time.
Do you see it right there, though?
I do see that language, and if this language becomes controversial, we can address that issue at a later time because the proposed amendment does the job. It protects LGBTQ individuals at a time when we are seeing unprecedented heightened violence towards LGBTQ individuals. And while I appreciate the House version that dealt with issues such as race, religion, creed, political beliefs, we see that the gay panic defense has been used. It is used every year. It has been used thousands of times, and it has been used successfully. And that is why the American Bar Association recommends that it be abolished. We don't see that these other defenses have been used. And in fact, by abolishing the gay panic defense, we would then create precedent that a class-based defense, and I'm using class in the broad sense of a group of individuals, that a class-based provocation defense is unacceptable, making it less likely that a court would allow it and that a jury would buy it. By protecting one, we're going some ways towards protecting all. So by doing the job here of protecting the group that was originally tried to be addressed by this bill, we're protecting each. This is not the moment to turn this down by losing the forest for the trees.
Thank you. We appreciate your input.
Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to ask if the Senate would mind if we took a 10-minute break, and just so we could all confer. You have the language you gave us, and do we have it?
We have Representative Lynn's amendment.
No, but I'd like to see what. Yeah, just so that we are all working on the same sheet of music. I hope they towed it. the committee of conference, and I believe that we have come to language that I think we can all agree on in principle. One of the concerns of the House conferees, and it was a legitimate concern, is that in any circumstance whatsoever that a woman would be barred from raising a self-defense claim if an unwanted sexual advance or of any kind were against her and she felt threatened to the point where she would be justified as using force, she would be barred from using that self-defense force. It is, we have changed it so that such that this is very extremely narrow. It would not affect that situation. And it is the legislative intent that this not apply and limit a woman's right to self-defense in any way, shape, or form. And I would ask that the Senate, if they have anything to say, I think we're ready to.
Yeah, I would agree with that description. So, absolutely self-defense is still permitted in this situation. We're talking about homicide, and we're talking about the situation where you cannot say, I committed, well, it wouldn't be a mitigating factor to say I committed this murder because that person was gay. So it does not in any way change the situation that I rightly agree with you regarding a woman's right to self-defense.
And just those are completely different defenses. One's a mitigation defense. Self-defense is an affirmative defense. You're not
Right.
guilty at that point. So they're different defenses altogether. They're not the same. And that's why with the original bill, I think if you look at the RSA, it's under the amendment that we've been talking about should go under that section, not under the other RSA. I think it was.
So what you're referring to, Representative, is maintaining the affirmative defense, which we are not touching at all. What we are addressing in this proposal is that mitigating. Correct?
Okay, so having said that, I think that we've. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd just like to add that I will be coming back next year with a bill to make sure that we address the other concerns that were addressed by the House version, race and other things. But I'm glad that we were able to come up with an agreement to ban the gay panic defense, which is, I think, an important thing to do.
And I would be proud to co-sponsor that bill with you, Representative Wheeler.
And to save you some time, just maybe we talk about that off at the
Okay.
hearings. We'll talk.
All right. At this point, we would like to vote. Is the House in favor of this language
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All in favor?
in the Senate? All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Then we have an agreement, and we will get this typed up by OLS, and we will get the conferee sign off. Excellent
Chair.
working with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.